CÉSAR Chávez stands as one of the most influential figures in the history of labor rights and social justice in the United States. As the leader of the United Farm Workers, UFW, his efforts to address the oppression and exploitation of farm workers have left an indelible mark on the social and political landscape. Chávez's journey from a poor migrant farm worker to the head of a national labor movement serves as a testament to his unwavering commitment to justice, dignity, and equality. This chapter provides an overview of Chávez's significance, contextualizing his work within broader civil rights struggles and highlighting his lasting impact on labor movements, immigrant rights, and nonviolent activism. Born in 1927 in Yuma, Arizona, Chávez's early life was shaped by the hardships faced by many Mexican-American families during the early 20th century. His experiences as a child of migrant farm workers exposed him to the severe poverty, discrimination, and harsh working conditions that farm laborers endured. These formative years instilled in him a profound sense of injustice, which later became the driving force behind his activism. Chávez's life and work cannot be separated from the broader historical context of racial inequality, economic exploitation, and the labor movement in the United States. As a leader, he sought to give voice to an invisible population that had long been marginalized: migrant farm workers. Chávez's activism did not emerge overnight, but was the result of a slow process of awakening to the harsh realities around him. His early encounters with labor organizing, particularly through the work of labor leader Fred Ross, shaped Chávez's approach to social justice. Ross, a community organizer with the community service organization CÉSAR, mentored Chávez and taught him the basics of organizing. It was through this experience that Chávez learned the value of community-based efforts to enact change. These early lessons would influence his later work with the United Farm Workers and his commitment to empowering farm workers through collective action. The establishment of the United Farm Workers in 1962 marked the beginning of Chávez's national prominence. Through the UFW, Chávez sought not only to improve the material conditions of farm workers, but also to change the broader social structures that perpetuated their exploitation. The UFW's success in the 1960s and 1970s in securing better wages, working conditions, and labor rights for farm workers is one of the most important chapters in the history of labor movements in the United States. Chávez's strategic approach to activism, characterized by nonviolent resistance, strikes, and boycotts, brought national attention to the plight of farm workers and pushed for legislative change. At the core of Chávez's leadership was his deep commitment to nonviolence. Influenced by the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Chávez believed that lasting social change could only be achieved through peaceful means. His decision to engage in hunger strikes, particularly during moments of crisis within the UFW, exemplified his dedication to nonviolent protest. Chávez's fasting was not only a personal sacrifice, but also a symbolic act of resistance, drawing attention to the struggles of farm workers and rallying support from communities across the United States. Through these acts of personal discipline and moral clarity, Chávez was able to lead a movement that avoided the divisiveness and violence that often accompany labor struggles. Chávez's influence extended far beyond the farm worker community. His work was closely linked to the larger civil rights movements of the 1960s, which sought to end racial discrimination and ensure equal rights for all Americans. While his focus was on the rights of Mexican-American farm workers, his efforts intersected with those of African American, Native American, and other minority groups fighting for justice. Chávez's leadership provided a model for how marginalized communities could come together and effect change through collective action and moral leadership. He became a symbol of hope for those who were disenfranchised and oppressed. However, Chávez's work was not without its challenges. Throughout his leadership of the UFW, he faced significant opposition from agricultural companies, the U.S. government, and even members of the labor movement. The farm industry's powerful interests frequently sought to undermine the UFW's efforts, using tactics such as intimidation, legal action, and media campaigns to discredit Chavez and his movement. Despite these obstacles, Chavez's resolve remained unbroken, and his ability to unite workers and gain public support for his cause was one of his most remarkable achievements. His leadership and the UFW's success in securing key victories, including union contracts, better wages, and improved working conditions, were crucial in shifting public perception about the rights of farm workers. In addition to his work with the UFW, Chavez's efforts were part of a broader struggle for social and economic justice in the United States. His advocacy for farm worker rights was intertwined with the larger political movements of the time, including the fight for civil rights, labor rights, and immigrant rights. Chavez's message resonated with diverse communities as it called for dignity, respect, and equality for all people, particularly those who had been historically excluded from the benefits of American society. His advocacy also highlighted the intersecting nature of race, class, and labor issues, emphasizing the need for solidarity across different social movements. César Chávez's legacy continues to resonate today, as the issues he championed remain relevant in contemporary discussions about labor rights, immigration, and social justice. Although the conditions for farm workers have improved since Chávez's time, many of the struggles he fought for, fair wages, safe working conditions, and the right to organize, remain ongoing challenges. Chávez's impact can be seen in the continued efforts of labor unions, immigrant advocacy groups, and social justice organizations that draw inspiration from his leadership. Moreover, his story serves as a reminder that the fight for justice is never easy, and it requires not only the courage to face adversity, but also the moral clarity to lead with compassion and integrity. César Chávez was born on March 31st, 1927, in Yuma, Arizona, to a family of Mexican descent. His early life was shaped by the harsh realities of poverty, hardship, and the discriminatory practices faced by Mexican Americans during the early 20th century. The Chávez family was part of a larger community of migrant farm workers who traveled across the Southwest in search of seasonal agricultural work. From a young age, César was exposed to the difficulties faced by his family and others like them. Long hours in the fields, meager wages, and constant uncertainty about the future. In his childhood years, César's family experienced the devastating effects of the Great Depression. As the economy collapsed in the 1930s, their situation worsened. Chávez's family, like many others, was forced to live in substandard conditions, moving from one place to another in search of work. These early experiences of poverty and displacement would leave an indelible mark on César and shape his worldview. His family struggles were compounded by systemic racism and discriminatory practices that limited opportunities for Mexican Americans. César, as a young boy, witnessed firsthand how his family and their neighbors were denied basic rights and opportunities simply because of their ethnicity. The Chávez family's migration was not unusual. Like countless other families in the Southwest, they were part of a seasonal cycle of labor that took them from farm to farm, often in remote and isolated locations. This constant uprooting instilled in César a sense of instability, but also fostered a deep understanding of the hardships faced by migrant workers. As he accompanied his parents through various farming regions, César encountered a world that seemed indifferent to the suffering of those who worked the land. He saw families like his own being treated as expendable, their labor undervalued, and their lives ignored by those in power. When César was 11 years old, his family lost their land during the Great Depression. This event marked a pivotal moment in his life, one that led him to become more attuned to the struggles of farm workers. The loss of their land meant that César and his family joined the ranks of the migrant laborers, moving from farm to farm and living in poverty for the next several years. This experience gave César an intimate understanding of the difficulties of farm work, including the long hours, grueling physical labor, and lack of basic protections for workers. During this time, César's education was interrupted as his family struggled to make ends meet. He attended school sporadically, often having to leave to work alongside his parents in the fields. Despite these interruptions, Chávez's love for learning remained strong. He was a bright and determined student, but the challenges of his early life made it difficult to focus on his studies. His formal education was limited, and by the time he reached high school, he had already spent several years working in the fields. Nevertheless, Chávez found mentors in various community leaders who helped him realize the power of education and collective action in addressing the problems he had witnessed throughout his youth. As a young man, César Chávez sought to escape the cycle of poverty and uncertainty that had defined his early life. After completing his formal schooling, he joined the U.S. Navy at the age of 17 during World War II. His time in the military was an important turning point in his life. While serving in the Navy, Chávez was exposed to different parts of the country and interacted with people from diverse backgrounds. This experience broadened his perspective and helped him develop a deeper understanding of the social and political structures that shaped American society. The military service, however, also highlighted the stark contrast between the opportunities available to him and those afforded to others. Upon his return to civilian life in 1948, Chávez settled in San Jose, California, where he began working as a laborer. It was here that he encountered Fred Ross, a community organizer who would play a critical role in shaping Chávez's path toward activism. Ross was working with the community service organization, CSO, an organization dedicated to improving the living conditions of Mexican-American communities. Ross's work inspired Chávez to become involved in organizing efforts, and in 1952, he joined the CSO as a community organizer. This decision marked the beginning of Chávez's commitment to social justice and his eventual journey into labor organizing. Chávez's work with the CSO was an important formative experience. He learned the essential skills of grassroots organizing, such as building community coalitions, advocating for political change, and mobilizing people to take collective action. Through the CSO, Chávez became deeply involved in efforts to combat discrimination and secure better living conditions for Mexican Americans in California. His work was not limited to labor rights, but extended to political empowerment, as he helped organize voters, fight for civil rights, and advocate for better treatment of Mexican American communities. During this period, Chávez's worldview began to take shape around a central belief that true change could only come through collective action and solidarity. The idea of organizing people to fight for their rights became the foundation of his future work. He believed that it was not enough for individuals to protest alone. Instead, they needed to come together as a united front to demand their rights and improve their conditions. This philosophy would guide his leadership in the years to come, particularly when he founded the United Farm Workers in the early 1960s. The formative years of César Chávez's life were not defined by grand victories or public recognition, but rather by the personal experiences that molded his values and beliefs. It was during these years that he developed a profound empathy for the struggles of the marginalized and oppressed. His childhood, marked by poverty, racial discrimination, and instability, shaped his understanding of justice and human dignity. Moreover, His exposure to community organizing and social justice efforts would lay the groundwork for his future as a leader of the labor movement. Chávez's early life serves as a powerful testament to the resilience of individuals who, despite facing overwhelming obstacles, find ways to fight for a better future. His journey from a poor migrant farm worker to a community organizer and eventual leader of a national labor movement was not inevitable, but it was deeply rooted in his formative experiences. These experiences, rooted in hardship, injustice, and the constant struggle for survival, fueled Chávez's lifelong dedication to the cause of farm workers and social justice. The seeds of César Chávez's deep commitment to social justice were sown long before he became a national figure in the fight for farm worker rights. As a young man, Chávez was not immediately drawn to activism. Instead, his journey towards social justice was a gradual process, one that emerged through a series of personal experiences, challenges, and encounters with social inequalities. By the time he was working with the community service organization, CÉSAR, in the early 1950s, Chávez had begun to understand that the world he grew up in, one marked by economic exploitation and racial prejudice, was not only unjust, but in need of radical change. Chávez's awakening to social justice began to take shape when he started to recognize the power dynamics that existed between the oppressed and those in positions of authority. Raised in an environment where his family struggled to survive, he had witnessed firsthand the ways in which institutions, whether economic, educational, or political, exploited people like his family. As he moved beyond his early work in agriculture and entered the broader world of community organizing, Chávez began to see that the struggles of farm workers were part of a larger web of systemic inequality, one that affected people of color, the working class, and immigrants across the country. This realization would become the driving force behind his advocacy for change. One pivotal moment in Chávez's political development occurred during his time working for the CSO. The CSO was focused on improving the lives of Mexican Americans in California, and Chávez became deeply involved in organizing efforts aimed at securing political representation, better working conditions, and equal rights for Mexican Americans. At this point, Chávez's worldview expanded beyond the personal struggles of his own family to a broader understanding of collective action and community solidarity. He began to understand that in order to create lasting change, individuals needed to come together, organize, and advocate for their rights as a unified force. Chávez's work with the CSO was an eye-opening experience. As he helped organize voter registration drives, lobbied for civil rights protections, and advocated for political reforms, he saw the power of grassroots organizing to bring about tangible change. But it was also during this time that Chávez began to witness the limitations of working within the existing political structures. He quickly learned that institutional change, particularly in a system dominated by wealthy landowners, corporations, and political elites, was slow and often met with resistance. The realization that traditional political avenues might not be enough to address the systemic issues faced by farm workers and other marginalized communities pushed Chávez toward more radical forms of activism. One of the most formative experiences in Chávez's development as an activist occurred when he met Fred Ross, a seasoned community organizer who would play a key role in shaping Chávez's approach to social justice. Ross introduced Chávez to the principles of nonviolent direct action and the power of organizing working-class communities to fight for their rights. Ross's mentorship was transformative, offering Chávez both the practical skills of organizing and the philosophical foundation for his future activism. Ross's influence would stay with Chávez throughout his life, particularly in a way that he emphasized the importance of dignity, respect, and self-determination in the struggle for justice. Chávez's growing commitment to social justice was also deeply influenced by the broader political climate of the 1950s and 1960s. The civil rights movement was in full swing, and Chávez became inspired by the work of leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the nonviolent philosophy they espoused. Chávez saw that the struggle for civil rights for African Americans was intrinsically linked to the fight for labor rights and immigrant rights. This realization solidified his belief that the fight for justice must be intersectional, addressing not only race but also class, gender, and economic inequality. He was determined to create a movement that could speak to the injustices faced by all marginalized communities, not just those of Mexican descent. While working with the CÉSAR, Chávez also began to notice the growing tensions between the agricultural industry and farm workers. The labor system in agriculture was brutal, and workers were often subjected to unsafe working conditions, long hours, and substandard wages. Chávez became increasingly aware of the vast disparity between the wealth of farm owners and the abysmal conditions that farm workers endured. These observations marked the beginning of his decision to focus his activism on improving the lives of farm workers, a group whose struggles were often overlooked or ignored by mainstream society. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Chávez's vision of justice began to crystallize around the idea that farm workers could organize to demand better conditions, higher wages, and respect for their rights. He began to see organizing farm workers as the next logical step in his activist journey. Chávez believed that farm workers, who were often isolated, disenfranchised, and invisible in the eyes of the public, could benefit from the same kind of organization that had helped improve conditions for other marginalized groups. Chávez was convinced that farm workers had the power to transform their own lives if they could be mobilized to fight for their rights through collective action. This period of awakening also marked Chávez's growing commitment to the principle of nonviolence. He saw how nonviolent resistance had been a central tool in the success of the civil rights movement, and he believed it was essential for the farm workers' movement as well. Chávez was inspired by the example of Mahatma Gandhi, whose philosophy of nonviolent resistance had helped secure India's independence from British colonial rule. Chávez believed that through peaceful protests, hunger strikes, and boycotts, farm workers could bring attention to their struggles and force change without resorting to violence. By the early 1960s, César Chávez had fully committed himself to the cause of social justice for farm workers. He left the CSO to found the National Farm Workers Association, NFWA, in 1962, which would later become the United Farm Workers, UFW. This decision marked the beginning of his national campaign to improve the lives of farm workers, a mission that would define the rest of his life. Chávez's transition from general social justice activism to a focused effort on farm worker rights represented the culmination of his evolving understanding of injustice and the tools necessary to combat it. In 1962, César Chávez took a decisive step in his journey toward becoming a leader of national importance. After several years of community organizing, Chávez founded the National Farm Workers Association, NFWA, in Delano, California, with the goal of addressing the overwhelming exploitation and disenfranchisement of farm workers in the United States. His decision to form this organization was driven by a deep-seated belief that collective action could transform the lives of farm workers, who were often invisible, marginalized, and powerless. This chapter details the birth of the NFWA, its early struggles, and how it eventually evolved into the United Farm Workers, UFW, a movement that would change the landscape of labor rights in America forever. The formation of the NFWA was not an isolated event, but the culmination of years of work and reflection by Chávez. He had witnessed firsthand the brutal conditions faced by farm workers in the fields, and he understood that their lack of organization was a major barrier to improving their lives. In establishing the NFWA, Chavez sought to empower farm workers, give them a collective voice, and provide them with the tools to negotiate for better wages, safer working conditions, and respect for their rights. The idea was simple yet radical. Farm workers could change their circumstances if they were united, if they stood together and fought for their dignity and fair treatment. One of the early challenges Chavez faced was convincing farm workers, many of whom were fearful and distrustful of unions, to join the movement. For generations, farm workers had been subjected to intimidation, exploitation, and a lack of legal protections. In many cases, they had been told that they had no power to improve their situation. The agricultural industry was deeply entrenched, and its influence extended into local governments and law enforcement, often leading to a climate of fear and silence. Chavez, however, was undeterred. He knew that building trust with the workers would be a long and difficult process, but he also understood that without their participation, the NFWA would not succeed. To overcome this initial resistance, Chavez focused on creating a sense of community among farm workers, emphasizing solidarity and the idea that they were not alone in their struggles. He would travel to various migrant labor camps, speaking with workers and organizing meetings to discuss their grievances. He personally reached out to workers, often in the evenings after long hours in the fields, offering them a vision of hope and empowerment. He encouraged them to see their labor not as menial or disposable, but as a crucial contribution to the nation's economy. By appealing to their sense of dignity and shared humanity, Chavez began to build a base of support for the NFWA. Chavez's approach to organizing was rooted in a deep respect for the workers he sought to represent. He recognized that farm workers often lived in isolated conditions, without access to the resources or protections that many other workers took for granted. His efforts to organize them were based not on charity, but on a recognition of their inherent worth and their right to fair treatment. He worked alongside the workers in the fields, not as an outsider, but as a fellow laborer. This sense of shared experience allowed him to build a rapport with workers and demonstrate his genuine commitment to their cause. In the early years of the NFWA, Chavez and his colleagues faced significant obstacles. The agricultural industry in California was dominated by powerful landowners and corporate growers who had a long history of exploiting farm labor. These growers used every means at their disposal to thwart any attempts at unionization, including hiring strikebreakers, using legal maneuvers to break up organizing efforts, and leveraging their political influence to prevent labor legislation that would benefit workers. The first major test for the NFWA came in 1965, when Chavez and his fellow organizers decided to take on the powerful grape growers in Delano, California. The grape strike was a critical turning point for the NFWA and for Chavez's leadership. When the workers at the Delano vineyards went on strike to demand better wages and working conditions, the NFWA stepped in to support their cause. This was not a simple labor dispute. It was a bold, collective effort that challenged the entrenched power of the agricultural industry. The strike, led by Chavez and the NFWA, was an early example of his strategy of nonviolent resistance. The workers, many of whom were Mexican-American and Filipino, came together to demand better treatment, and they were joined by Chavez in a peaceful but determined stand against the growers. One of the most important tactics employed by Chavez and the NFWA during the Delano grape strike was a national boycott of table grapes. Chavez understood that in order to gain public attention and build support for the workers' cause, he needed to expand the scope of the protest beyond the local area. He called on consumers across the nation to stop purchasing grapes until the growers agreed to better conditions for the workers. This boycott became a nationwide movement, with supporters organizing picket lines, rallies, and demonstrations across the country. The success of the grape boycott brought national attention to the plight of farm workers and gave the NFWA the leverage it needed to negotiate with the growers. Despite the intense opposition they faced, the NFWA and its supporters were able to secure a major victory in 1970 when the Delano grape growers agreed to sign a collective bargaining agreement with the union. This victory was a monumental achievement for Chavez and the farm worker movement, as it represented the first time in U.S. history that farm workers had successfully negotiated for better wages and working conditions through collective bargaining. The success of the Delano grape strike and boycott established the NFWA as a legitimate force in labor organizing and solidified Chavez's status as a leader of national importance. In the aftermath of the Delano grape strike, the NFWA evolved into the United Farm Workers, UFW. The success of the strike demonstrated that Chavez's vision for farm worker empowerment was not only feasible, but also powerful. The UFW became a symbol of hope for farm workers across the country, and it continued to grow in size and influence. Chavez's leadership, combined with his ability to inspire and organize workers, helped the UFW become one of the most prominent labor organizations in the United States. The formation of the UFW was not just about winning contracts or securing better wages. It was about changing the way farm workers were viewed and treated in American society. Chavez's commitment to nonviolence, solidarity, and justice resonated with a broad coalition of supporters, including religious groups, students, and civil rights activists. The UFW's success in achieving better labor conditions for farm workers was a testament to the power of grassroots organizing and the idea that even the most marginalized groups could fight for their rights and achieve meaningful change. The formation of the United Farm Workers, UFW, in the early 1970s marked the beginning of a new phase in CÉSAR Chávez's struggle for justice. But the victories that followed would come only after enduring even greater challenges. While the success of the Delano grape strike and the national boycott had solidified the UFW's presence in the national consciousness, the road ahead would prove to be fraught with obstacles, not only from the powerful agricultural industry, but also from within the broader labor movement, political structures, and the media. In this chapter, we will explore the continuing fight for farm worker rights and the ongoing struggles Chavez and the UFW would face in their quest for justice. One of the early struggles that emerged after the grape strike was the challenge of maintaining momentum. While the Delano grape growers had been forced to the bargaining table and signed agreements with the UFW, the real challenge lay in ensuring that these agreements were upheld. Farm workers had won an important victory, but the question of long-term sustainability loomed large. The UFW's ability to organize and negotiate was tested as agricultural labor relations evolved, and Chavez soon realized that achieving long-lasting improvements would require not only organizing workers in new fields, but also securing the political power to enforce labor rights in the agricultural sector. The agricultural industry responded to the growing strength of the UFW by deploying its vast resources to undermine the union. Growers utilized a range of tactics to resist unionization, including the use of strike breakers, intimidation, and sometimes violence. In addition, many growers sought to exploit legal loopholes to evade labor laws. The industry, already accustomed to having its way with farm workers, was not willing to give up its decades-long control without a fight. The opposition was often fierce and came not just from the growers themselves, but also from local and state governments, which were reluctant to intervene in support of the union. This dynamic created a volatile environment for Chavez and the UFW. as they struggled to maintain the momentum they had built. One of the most significant battles that the UFW faced during this period came in the form of continued resistance to unionization efforts in the fields. The UFW, despite its victories, had not yet achieved widespread acceptance across all sectors of the agricultural industry. Growers continued to exploit workers, and many farm workers were still wary of unionizing, fearing retaliation, eviction, and being blacklisted. To combat this, Chavez and his colleagues focused on expanding their reach and consolidating their victories, hoping to show farm workers the tangible benefits of union membership. The success of their earlier campaigns had demonstrated that collective action could bring about real change, but convincing workers to stand together in the face of continued opposition was an ongoing challenge. Chavez's strategy for overcoming these obstacles involved a multifaceted approach. He continued to advocate for strikes and boycotts, but he also realized that the UFW's influence would be limited without political allies. Therefore, he turned his attention to political organizing, seeking to secure better labor protections for farm workers through legislation. Chavez worked tirelessly to influence state and federal lawmakers, arguing that farm workers deserve the same protections as workers in other industries. He pushed for the establishment of stronger labor laws that would guarantee farm workers the right to unionize, negotiate contracts, and ensure safer working conditions. In addition to his political lobbying efforts, Chavez used his platform to raise public awareness about the plight of farm workers. He knew that in order to win the public support, he had to make the issues facing farm workers visible to the wider American public. Through media campaigns, public speeches, and appearances, Chavez became a leading figure in the fight for farm worker rights. His connection to the people, his ability to speak with passion and conviction, and his commitment to nonviolence allowed him to build a national following. However, despite these efforts, Chavez and the UFW would continue to encounter opposition from political elites who viewed the growing power of the Union as a threat to their interests. One of the defining characteristics of Chavez's leadership during this period was his unwavering commitment to nonviolent resistance. Chavez had always believed that peaceful protests were the most powerful weapon in the fight for justice, and he continued to champion this philosophy even as the stakes grew higher. His nonviolent approach, which included fasting, peaceful picket lines, and educational campaigns, served to differentiate the UFW from other more militant movements. Chavez's use of fasting as a form of protest became one of the most iconic aspects of his leadership, drawing attention to the cause of farm workers and demonstrating his personal dedication to their struggles. In 1972, Chavez embarked on one of the most notable fasting campaigns of his career, a 25-day hunger strike that focused on the need for better conditions and wages for farm workers. The fast, which drew national attention, was a deeply symbolic act of personal sacrifice that highlighted the dire circumstances of the farm worker community. It was also a powerful tool to draw attention to the UFW's cause and its commitment to nonviolent resistance. Throughout his fasting, Chavez emphasized that it was not an act of self-pity, but a means to press for justice. His act of personal sacrifice rallied supporters and deepened the commitment of the UFW's members, solidifying their resolve to continue the struggle. While the UFW continued to face resistance from growers, the political arena also posed significant challenges. Over the course of the 1970s, various state and national political figures used their influence to undermine the farm workers' movement. From hostile local governments to the federal administration under President Richard Nixon, many sought to limit the UFW's power by preventing the passage of labor-friendly legislation. The political landscape was often inhospitable to the UFW's goals. with key figures within the political establishment unwilling to stand with farm workers against the powerful agricultural industry. Despite these setbacks, Chávez remained steadfast in his dedication to the farm workers. His belief in their right to fair treatment was unshakable, and he remained committed to using the tools of grassroots, organizing, and peaceful protest to win their rights. By the mid-1970s, the UFW had grown to become a national symbol for workers' rights, gaining the support of civil rights activists, religious groups, students, and ordinary Americans who saw Chávez's struggle as part of the larger fight for justice and equality in the United States. As the movement progressed, the UFW found success in additional strikes and boycotts, further strengthening its position and forcing growers to engage in meaningful negotiations. The establishment of farm worker contracts and improved labor conditions became increasingly common, though the struggle was far from over. The UFW, under Chávez's leadership, had laid the groundwork for lasting change, but the road ahead was still full of challenges. The victories were hard-won, and the battles for justice continued. By the mid-1970s, CÉSAR Chávez and the United Farm Workers, UFW, had emerged as one of the most prominent labor movements in the United States, yet the struggle to improve farm worker conditions was far from over. Chávez realized that to achieve long-lasting change, he needed to expand the UFW's reach, build broader coalitions, and continue to apply pressure on both the agricultural industry and political leaders. One of the most ambitious and defining actions of this period was the March for Dignity in 1975, a bold statement of solidarity and a call to action for farm workers across the country. This chapter focuses on the March for Dignity, which was not just a physical journey, but a symbol of the UFW's ongoing fight for justice. The March for Dignity began in early 1975, with Chávez and a group of UFW organizers planning a symbolic march from Delano, California, to Sacramento, the state capital. The march was designed to draw attention to the continued exploitation of farm workers and to demand greater legal protections for them. Chávez and the UFW had already achieved significant victories, but there was still much work to be done. The march was intended to be a peaceful demonstration of strength and unity, one that would resonate beyond the farm worker community and into the broader national conversation about workers' rights. The decision to march to Sacramento was not taken lightly. Delano, the starting point of the march, was a town deeply connected to the history of the UFW and to Chávez's personal journey. It was here that the UFW had made its first major stand with the grape strike, and it was here that Chávez and his supporters had begun to realize the potential for change. But the march would be a long and challenging one, both physically and symbolically. The route was nearly 300 miles long, and the marchers would be walking through some of the most difficult terrain in California, enduring the harsh sun and uncertain weather. Yet, this challenge would serve as a testament to the resolve and resilience of those fighting for farm worker rights. Chávez, ever the strategist, understood that the March for Dignity would need to be more than just a physical act of protest. He saw it as an opportunity to galvanize supporters, energize the UFW's base, and demonstrate the deep commitment of farm workers to their cause. For many, the march was a chance to come together as a community, to feel the strength of their collective action, and to show the world that they would not be intimidated or silenced. The march also provided an opportunity for Chávez to reinforce the core values of the UFW: dignity, respect, and the unwavering belief in nonviolent resistance. As the marchers began their journey, they were joined by supporters from all walks of life. Students, religious leaders, civil rights activists, and even members of other labor unions lent their voices and bodies to the cause. It was a diverse and vibrant coalition that crossed racial, ethnic, and political lines, united in the belief that farm workers deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. The march quickly gained national attention, and its significance became apparent as it unfolded. It was not just a march for farm worker rights. It was a march for human rights, for justice, and for a better future for all working people. Throughout the march, Chávez's leadership was evident in his quiet, steady determination. He was not the loudest voice in the crowd, but his presence was magnetic. Chávez often walked at the front, leading the way with his calm demeanor and his strong commitment to the principles of nonviolence. As he walked, he engaged with fellow marchers, offering words of encouragement, listening to their concerns, and reminding them of the importance of their cause. He also used the march as an opportunity to reflect on the journey of the UFW and to remind those involved that the fight was far from over. Every step taken was a step toward dignity and justice, and every mile was a message to the powerful agricultural industry that their grip on the workers was weakening. The march also provided Chávez with an opportunity to publicly challenge the political establishment. By marching to Sacramento, he was directly confronting the state government, which had, at times, been an obstacle to the UFW's goals. The state's political leadership, including Governor Jerry Brown, was hesitant to intervene in the struggle between the UFW and the growers, and Chávez knew that in order to change the system, he would need to apply pressure from all sides. The march to Sacramento was a public declaration that the UFW would no longer be ignored or sidelined. The message was clear. The farm workers were a political force to be reckoned with, and they would not rest until their demands were met. The impact of the March for Dignity was far-reaching. Not only did it bring greater attention to the plight of farm workers, but it also helped solidify the UFW's position as the leading voice in the struggle for agricultural labor rights. The march highlighted the importance of grassroots activism and nonviolent resistance, and it reminded both the public and the political establishment that the UFW was committed to achieving lasting change through peaceful means. The visibility of the march, combined with its deep symbolism, helped to elevate the conversation about workers' rights and push the issue to the forefront of national politics. As the marchers reached Sacramento, their arrival was met with a mixture of anticipation and triumph. For Chávez and the UFW, the march was not an end, but a continuation of their efforts to secure justice for farm workers. The marchers were received with open arms by local supporters, and Chávez took the opportunity to address the state government, demanding better protections for farm workers and challenging political leaders to stand up for the rights of workers. His speech was a call to action, urging the state to pass laws that would guarantee farm workers the right to organize and negotiate for better wages and conditions. The March for Dignity also had a lasting effect on the morale of the UFW's members. It served as a reminder that their collective efforts could lead to real change, and it reinforced the idea that the struggle for farm worker rights was part of a larger movement for social justice. For many of the marchers, the journey to Sacramento was a life-changing experience. It deepened their commitment to the cause and inspired a new generation of activists to join the movement. After the historic success of the March for Dignity and the widespread attention it garnered, CÉSAR Chávez and the United Farm Workers, UFW, were at a crossroads. While the march had demonstrated the strength and unity of farm workers, sustaining that momentum and translating it into meaningful, lasting change was no easy feat. To fight for farm worker rights was not just about winning individual battles, but about creating a nationwide movement that could continue to pressure the agricultural industry and political leaders for systemic reforms. In this chapter, we will examine the struggles that Chávez faced in trying to build a national movement that would secure farm worker rights and ensure that the fight for justice did not falter in the years that followed. One of the primary challenges facing the UFW during this period was the difficulty of expanding its reach. While the UFW had grown in size and influence, it was still primarily concentrated in California, where most of the nation's agricultural labor force was located. Chavez understood that in order for the farm worker movement to become truly national, the UFW needed to extend its efforts beyond California and organize workers in other agricultural regions across the United States. However, the logistics of expanding the union's efforts into new states were daunting. The farm worker community was scattered across the country, and each region had its own unique challenges and obstacles. To expand the UFW's reach, Chavez and the union's leadership had to find ways to replicate their success in California elsewhere. This required building local chapters in new regions, training new organizers, and ensuring that farm workers in these areas understood the importance of unionizing. It was a difficult task, as many farm workers outside of California had not experienced the kind of solidarity and collective action that the UFW had built in the West. In some regions, farm workers were more isolated and less aware of their rights, making it harder to convince them of the value of joining the UFW. Moreover, the farm worker community was often divided along ethnic lines, with Mexican-American workers, Filipino workers, and other immigrant groups all having different histories and cultural practices. Chavez was acutely aware of this and made it a priority to overcome these divisions by fostering unity within the UFW. He worked tirelessly to ensure that all workers, regardless of their background, felt that they were part of the same struggle. Chavez's efforts to build a cohesive, inclusive movement would become one of the defining characteristics of the UFW and of his leadership. Another challenge that Chavez faced during this period was the growing resistance from the agricultural industry and its allies. The success of the UFW in California and the visibility of its national campaigns had made the farm worker movement a major political force, and the growers were not willing to relinquish their power without a fight. Many large agricultural corporations began to deploy more aggressive tactics to undermine the UFW's efforts, including hiring private security firms to intimidate workers, using legal battles to tie up unionization efforts, and lobbying state and federal governments to pass laws that would weaken labor protections for farm workers. In particular, Chavez found himself at odds with the state of California, which had previously seemed more sympathetic to the UFW's cause. Governor Jerry Brown, who had been an ally in the past, became more cautious as the political landscape shifted. The state's political leadership was under intense pressure from powerful agricultural interests, and it became clear that achieving meaningful legislative change for farm workers would require more than just public demonstrations and grassroots organizing. Chavez realized that the political environment was not always conducive to the UFW's goals, and he would need to find new ways to navigate the complex terrain of labor politics. At the same time, the media played a critical role in shaping public opinion about the farm worker movement. While Chavez and the UFW had received considerable media attention during their earlier campaigns, the press began to shift its focus as the movement grew. The media often portrayed the UFW's campaigns as a conflict between farm workers and the powerful agricultural industry, but it did not always provide a nuanced understanding of the issues at stake. In some cases, the press misrepresented Chavez's actions, focusing more on sensational aspects of the movement, such as his hunger strikes, rather than the deeper, systemic problems that the UFW was fighting to address. Chavez himself was deeply frustrated by the media's portrayal of the UFW, and he often felt that the public was not fully aware of the everyday struggles of farm workers. His frustration with the media was compounded by the fact that the public's attention span was often short-lived. After the March for Dignity, for example, the media quickly moved on to other stories, leaving the UFW to continue its difficult work in relative obscurity. This constant battle for visibility and public support weighed heavily on Chavez, who was acutely aware that without sustained attention and pressure, the movement would lose its momentum. Despite these challenges, Chavez continued to press forward, knowing that the stakes were too high to give up. He remained committed to the vision of a fairer, more just agricultural system, one in which farm workers would be able to negotiate for better wages, working conditions, and benefits. This commitment was evident in the union's continued focus on organizing and bargaining for better contracts. The UFW was relentless in its pursuit of new victories, but these victories often came at great cost. The UFW faced numerous legal battles, with growers and their allies attempting to sabotage the union's efforts through lawsuits, court injunctions, and other legal maneuvering. The toll of these legal battles on Chavez and the UFW was substantial. The union's resources were stretched thin as it fought on multiple fronts, organizing new workers, negotiating contracts, and defending its members in court. Chavez, ever the tireless advocate for farm workers, often found himself overwhelmed by the sheer scope of the movement's demands. Yet, despite the exhaustion and frustration, he remained resolute in his belief that the farm worker struggle was one that had to be won. He believed that the success of the UFW was not just about improving the lives of individual workers, but about changing the entire system of agricultural labor in the United States. As the 1970s came to a close, the challenges of sustaining the momentum of the farm worker movement became more pronounced. The UFW had made significant strides, but the long-term viability of the movement was uncertain. The growing resistance from the agricultural industry, the shifting political landscape, and the difficulty of expanding the movement into new regions all presented significant obstacles. Yet, through it all, Chavez's leadership remained the anchor of the UFW. His ability to inspire and mobilize workers, even in the face of tremendous adversity, kept the movement alive and focused on its ultimate goal: securing dignity and justice for farm workers. As CÉSAR Chávez and the United Farm Workers, UFW, entered the 1980s, the movement was facing new and unprecedented challenges that required an evolution of strategy. The successes of the 1970s had been significant, yet the political and legal landscape was becoming increasingly hostile to the union's efforts. The UFW's victories in organizing farm workers, negotiating contracts, and achieving national visibility had ruffled the feathers of not only the agricultural elite, but also a range of political actors, including the growing conservative movement in California and Washington, D.C. This chapter delves into the complex political and legal challenges the UFW faced during this critical period and how Chavez responded to protect the gains that the Union had made. One of the most significant political challenges came in the form of shifting attitudes toward labor unions in the United States. The late 1970s and early 1980s saw a rise in conservative political thought, embodied most notably by the election of President Ronald Reagan in 1980. Reagan's presidency marked a turning point for organized labor in the country, with the new administration focused on curbing union power and promoting policies that were seen as more favorable to business interests. For the UFW, Reagan's election was a harbinger of a difficult future. The president's administration would be less inclined to pass laws that favored farm workers or supported unions, and his policies would soon come into direct conflict with the UFW's mission. As the national political landscape shifted, so too did the California political environment. In the early years of the UFW's organizing efforts, the union had enjoyed significant support from the state government under Governor Jerry Brown, but by the time Reagan's influence began to take hold, the political climate had changed. New agricultural laws began to emerge, many of which sought to undermine the UFW's progress. These changes included efforts to reduce the power of farm worker unions by revising the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, (ELRA), which had been passed in 1975 to provide farm workers with the right to unionize and bargain collectively. The UFW had worked hard to ensure that the ELRA became law, but the new political environment meant that it would be increasingly difficult to protect the rights of farm workers. One of the key elements of the Reagan administration's stance toward labor unions was a commitment to deregulation and free market principles. Under this philosophy, farm workers were seen as part of an industry that should be left to negotiate their own conditions without excessive governmental interference. This vision ran counter to everything that Chavez and the UFW had worked for over the previous decade. The union had used legal frameworks and state intervention to secure basic rights for farm workers. But the Reagan administration's approach to labor issues prioritized the interests of employers over workers, weakening the legal mechanisms that the UFW relied upon. Another significant blow came from the legal system, as the UFW faced an increasing number of lawsuits from agricultural growers. These lawsuits were designed to drain the union's resources and divert attention away from organizing efforts. Growers and corporate interests, backed by their legal teams, sought to challenge the union's legal victories, using the courts to delay or overturn agreements that had been reached through collective bargaining. For example, the UFW faced legal battles over contracts that had already been signed, with growers challenging their terms and attempting to nullify the agreements. The legal challenges were not limited to California, but spread to other states where the UFW had attempted to organize farm workers, adding to the pressure on the union's leadership. The mounting legal costs were a significant strain on the UFW's resources. The union had always relied on the solidarity of its members and supporters to finance its operations, but the growing number of lawsuits stretched these resources thin. In response, Chavez focused on fundraising and strengthening the union's grassroots support. He understood that the fight was no longer just about organizing workers in the fields. It was also about surviving the ongoing legal battles that sought to undermine the union's existence. The legal costs took a toll on the morale of the UFW, as many members and supporters grew weary of the constant strain on resources. Chavez's commitment to nonviolent protest and his insistence on peaceful resistance were put to the test during this time. The legal and political environment created a sense of frustration within the union, and some of its more militant members began to question Chavez's strategy of nonviolence. While Chavez had always maintained that the moral high ground was essential in the fight for justice, the legal and political system seemed increasingly hostile to the farm workers' cause. The UFW found itself in a difficult position as it sought to balance the principles of nonviolence with the urgent need for practical action in the face of growing opposition. Despite these challenges, Chavez remained resolute. He continued to champion the cause of farm workers, often calling for greater unity within the union and among its supporters. He urged members not to abandon their commitment to the principles of dignity, justice, and nonviolent protest, even in the face of overwhelming legal and political adversity. Chavez's ability to inspire his supporters during this period was a testament to his leadership. He continued to travel the country, speaking at rallies, engaging with grassroots activists, and reminding the public that the struggle for farm worker rights was far from over. One of the more significant moments during this period came in the form of the 1984 boycott of table grapes. While the UFW had already won significant victories in grape contracts in the 1970s, the 1984 boycott was a direct response to the legal and political challenges the union was facing. Chavez called for a renewed national boycott of grapes as a way to bring attention to the union's cause and to demonstrate that the fight for farm worker rights was still relevant. The boycott was a difficult and costly undertaking, but it proved to be a powerful tool for galvanizing public support and pressuring growers to the bargaining table. The 1984 boycott also served as a reminder of the UFW's ability to mobilize national solidarity. While the union's organizing efforts had slowed in some areas, the boycott helped to reignite passion and commitment among its base. Chávez traveled across the country, speaking at rallies, visiting communities of supporters, and engaging with students, religious groups, and other activists to garner support for the boycott. The Great Boycott became one of the most well-known actions of the UFW's later years and was instrumental in securing renewed attention for the issues facing farm workers. As César Chávez's prominence within the United Farm Workers, UFW, grew, so too did the weight of his leadership. The movement had taken a toll on him personally, physically, emotionally, and mentally. For Chávez, the fight for farm worker justice was not merely a professional endeavor. It was a calling, an identity woven into every facet of his life. However, the sacrifices that came with this calling became increasingly burdensome. This chapter explores the personal struggles and inner conflicts Chávez faced during the later years of his leadership, and how these challenges shaped his relationship with the UFW and his broader vision for the future of the movement. Chávez's commitment to nonviolence, which had guided the UFW through its most successful campaigns, was central to his philosophy, but it also placed him under immense personal strain. He firmly believed that the moral high ground was essential to the movement's success, which meant that no matter how much pressure the UFW faced from the powerful agricultural industry or political figures, he could not resort to violence or retaliation. This philosophy, though powerful, was also exhausting. The constant need to maintain peace in the face of mounting resistance from growers, legal battles, and internal disagreements wore on Chávez, who was known to spend long nights deliberating over the movement's next steps and contemplating the future. Physically, Chávez had long subjected himself to extreme conditions as part of his commitment to the UFW. He had fasted multiple times, most famously in 1968, to draw attention to the plight of farm workers and to encourage the public and political leaders to support the cause. While these fasts had achieved their intended purpose, they also took a severe toll on his health. By the 1980s, Chávez's body was showing the effects of years of fasting, intense stress, and the constant demands of leading a national movement. His weight fluctuated dramatically, his energy levels were inconsistent, and his overall health had deteriorated. Those closest to him often expressed concern over his well-being, but Chávez remained dedicated to his mission, even if it meant sacrificing his own health. Emotionally, Chávez grappled with the constant pressure of being the face of the farm worker movement. He had become a symbol of hope for many, but this role often left him feeling isolated. The constant demands for his time, the unrelenting pressure from political opponents, and the never-ending legal and economic battles wore on him emotionally. Despite his strong convictions and clear vision for the future of the UFW, he sometimes questioned the impact of his efforts. The ongoing struggles within the movement, the internal disputes, the losses in court battles, and the public perception of the UFW led to moments of self-doubt. At times, he felt as though the progress the movement had made was insufficient and that his leadership was not enough to secure the kind of systemic change he had always envisioned. Perhaps one of the most significant internal conflicts for Chávez during this period was his relationship with his family. His wife, Helen, and their 8 children had supported him from the very beginning of his journey with the UFW. But the demands of the movement had put a strain on their personal lives. Chávez's long absences, the emotional toll of his work, and the sacrifices required for him to lead the UFW meant that he was often away from home, missing important family events and milestones. His children, especially as they grew older, sometimes struggled with the absence of their father. Helen, who had always been his unwavering support, also faced the challenges of raising a large family while being married to a man who was often physically and emotionally absent due to his leadership of the UFW. This disconnect between Chávez's dedication to the movement and his family life became a source of tension. Helen was fully supportive of his work, but often expressed concern over the toll it was taking on him personally. The stress of being the sole leader of such a massive movement and the constant demands on his time left little space for the intimacy and connection that he needed in his personal life. The paradox of being loved and admired by millions, but sometimes feeling distant from those closest to him, was something Chávez had to wrestle with continually. Despite this, his commitment to the UFW never wavered, and he worked tirelessly to push the movement forward, even if it meant sacrificing the peace he longed for at home. Internally, Chávez also struggled with the dynamics of leadership within the UFW. While he had always been the central figure in the movement, he was aware that no single individual could carry the weight of the struggle alone. Over time, as the UFW's reach expanded and the challenges became more complex, he found himself working with a larger group of leaders within the union. Yet, the process of delegating authority was not always easy for Chávez. His sense of responsibility was so deeply ingrained that he often took on too much, unwilling to delegate fully to others. This not only placed undue pressure on him, but also led to frustrations within the organization, as some felt that Chávez's centrality to the movement hindered its ability to function more autonomously. The growing tension within the UFW itself was another challenge for Chávez. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the union was experiencing internal divisions, and some of the members who had once been Chávez's closest allies began to question his leadership style. These dissenting voices often centered around the movement's direction and whether the UFW was adapting effectively to the evolving political and economic landscape. Chávez, who had always prided himself on his ability to maintain unity, was hurt by these criticisms. He had invested so much of himself into the cause that it was difficult for him to accept dissent from within the ranks. However, he understood that the movement would have to evolve and adapt if it were to survive. The personal toll of leadership was not lost on those around Chávez. His closest supporters, including Dolores Huerta and other key figures within the UFW, were aware of the immense strain he was under. They did their best to provide support, but the reality of the situation was that Chávez often felt like he was carrying the weight of the entire farm worker movement on his shoulders. He felt an immense responsibility to both the farm workers and the broader community that relied on him. Yet, as much as he wanted to be a source of strength for others, he found it increasingly difficult to maintain his own sense of well-being. This inner conflict between his public role and his personal needs became a defining feature of his later years. Despite the personal challenges he faced, Chávez remained steadfast in his belief that the fight for justice was worth the sacrifices. He believed that the dignity of farm workers was more important than any personal pain or sacrifice he endured. However, as time went on, he began to recognize that sustaining the movement would require more than just his own efforts. He needed to empower others within the UFW to take on greater roles of leadership, allowing the movement to grow and flourish without being solely dependent on his presence. In the face of exhaustion and doubt, Chávez sought to cultivate a new generation of leaders who could carry the torch when he was no longer able to. Chávez's personal struggles were a reminder of the profound cost of leadership in social movements. While he remained a tireless advocate for farm workers, the sacrifices he made in the name of justice, his health, his family life, and his personal well-being serve as a testament to the complex and often painful nature of activism. Through it all, however, his unwavering dedication to the cause of farm worker rights and his ability to inspire others remained the central force that sustained the UFW. As César Chávez's health began to deteriorate and the landscape for farm workers became increasingly difficult, he faced the reality of his own mortality. The personal toll of decades of activism had left its mark on Chávez, but his commitment to the farm worker cause never wavered. By the time of his death in 1993, Chávez had achieved the extraordinary feat of creating a national movement that would continue to influence social justice efforts long after his passing. This final chapter reflects on the profound and lasting legacy of César Chávez, focusing on the enduring impact of the United Farm Workers, UFW, the ways in which his work changed the lives of countless individuals, and how his example continues to inspire future generations of activists. In the years leading up to his death, Chávez's health had been in decline. Years of fasting, the stress of leadership, and the constant pressure of the movement had left him physically frail. Yet, despite his weakened condition, he maintained a level of dedication to the UFW and farm worker rights that was unparalleled. Chávez was fully aware that the movement could not rest solely on his shoulders. He often expressed the hope that the fight for farm worker justice would continue after him, driven by the commitment of the next generation. He saw his role as one part of a larger movement, not as its defining figure. In his final years, Chávez's leadership was increasingly about preparing others to carry on the work he had started, empowering the younger generation of activists to take the helm. César Chávez's legacy is undeniably rooted in his accomplishments as a leader of the UFW and his tireless advocacy for farm workers. Under his leadership, the UFW not only won better wages and working conditions for farm workers, but also brought national attention to the struggles of agricultural laborers. His strategies, ranging from nonviolent protests, marches, and hunger strikes to boycotts, helped to shift public opinion about the treatment of farm workers in the United States. His famous Great Boycott, for example, was a powerful tool for economic pressure and was instrumental in securing landmark contracts that improved the lives of thousands of workers. Beyond the tangible victories for farm workers, Chávez's greatest achievement may have been his ability to transform the way society viewed labor rights and social justice. Before Chávez and the UFW, farm workers were among the most marginalized groups in the country, their labor essential yet largely invisible. Chávez's leadership helped to shine a light on their plight, challenging the status quo and pushing for systemic changes. His efforts forced the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about the exploitation of workers in one of the most profitable industries in the United States. Through his commitment to nonviolence and his ability to build coalitions, Chávez proved that social change could be achieved without resorting to violent means. The UFW itself has had a lasting impact on labor movements in the United States. While the union's influence waned in the years following Chávez's death, the principles he championed, worker dignity, fair treatment, and social justice, continued to resonate with activists and organizations long after his passing. His philosophy of nonviolence and his insistence on grassroots organizing inspired not just labor leaders, but activists in a wide variety of fields. Chávez's focus on humanizing the struggle for workers' rights rather than framing it in purely economic terms set a model for future movements that would echo his calls for dignity and respect for all workers, regardless of their background. One of the most significant aspects of Chávez's legacy is the continued influence he had on farm worker advocacy long after the UFW's peak. While the Union experienced setbacks in the 1980s and early 1990s, farm worker rights continued to gain national attention. Chávez's death did not mark the end of farm worker advocacy, but rather the beginning of a new chapter. The UFW, although no longer the dominant force it once was, continued to operate and to fight for the rights of farm workers. Additionally, many of the principles Chávez fought for were adopted by other labor organizations, creating a broader movement for labor rights and social justice that transcended the agricultural sector. Chávez's influence also reached beyond the United States, inspiring labor movements and human rights advocates around the world. His commitment to nonviolent protest and his tireless advocacy for the working poor became a touchstone for international social justice campaigns. Figures like South Africa's Nelson Mandela and India's Mahatma Gandhi, both of whom were champions of nonviolent resistance, found common ground with Chávez's principles. Chávez's ability to mobilize ordinary people and his belief in the power of collective action became a model for activists across the globe, particularly those seeking justice for marginalized and oppressed communities. In the United States, César Chávez's legacy has become synonymous with the fight for immigrant rights. As farm workers continued to face exploitation and marginalization, Chávez's example provided a foundation upon which later advocacy groups could build. Many modern immigrant rights organizations have looked to Chávez's work for inspiration, drawing from his strategies and his commitment to justice. His advocacy helped create a sense of solidarity among people of different backgrounds, uniting Mexican Americans, Filipino Americans, and other immigrant groups under a common cause. His vision was not just about farm workers, but about all workers and the dignity that should be afforded to them. Today, César Chávez's name is honored in a variety of ways. Schools, streets, and parks across the United States are named after him, a testament to his lasting influence. March 31st, his birthday, has been recognized as César Chávez Day in several states, a day to celebrate his contributions to civil rights and labor reform. Chávez's legacy also lives on through the César E. Chávez Foundation, which supports programs dedicated to improving the lives of low-income and underserved communities. The foundation continues to advance his ideals, particularly in the areas of education, advocacy, and community development. Even more significant than these formal recognitions is the way in which César Chávez's legacy continues to inspire young people across the country. Through his activism, Chávez proved that ordinary people, when united, can create extraordinary change. His story continues to serve as a beacon of hope for those fighting for justice, particularly in labor rights, civil rights, and immigrant rights. The lessons he taught about selflessness, nonviolence, and perseverance continue to resonate with new generations of activists who look to his example as they organize for a better future. In the final analysis, César Chávez's life and work have left an indelible mark on American society. While the challenges farm workers continue to face are far from over, Chávez's contributions have provided a framework for addressing these issues. His efforts not only improved the lives of countless workers, but also transformed the nation's understanding of social justice. The farm worker movement that he led and the broader labor movement that he inspired continue to fight for the values of dignity, respect, and equality that César Chávez so deeply believed in. His legacy, as both a man and a movement, will continue to influence and inspire for generations to come. Thus, César Chávez remains one of the most significant figures in the history of American social movements. His unwavering commitment to justice, his capacity to inspire others, and his vision for a world where all people are treated with dignity have ensured that his story will not be forgotten. As long as there are struggles for worker rights, civil rights, and social justice, the legacy of César Chávez will live on, a testament to the enduring power of one individual to change the world.